Are you tired of your Metallica records? Have you worn out your copy of Slayer, Rain and Blood? And can't you just get into all those new thrash metal bands? Well, maybe we've got something for you because thrash metal was all the rage in the mid to late 80s, and there were so many bands that you actually might not yet know. So we picked some more unknown bands from our collection and try to introduce them to you today. And yeah, this is, of course, Rock Kaput, two Germans talking about rock and metal. With me is our friend Alex from the United States, great thrash fanatic from the 80s. And yeah, let's see what we got for you, and hopefully we can surprise you a little bit. So, Alex, why don't you start with your first pick?
Sure. And thanks for having me back. This has been a lot of fun. And you came up with the sifting through the thrash moniker. And that's really what I've been doing because I've have a revamp of my record collection. So I've been kind of moving things around. And as we talked about doing this topic, I'm pulling out things that I totally forgot that I had, right? I bought them real time back in the day, but maybe I didn't keep up with. And it's been interesting because I've been rediscovering things, and there's also some bands that I had a first or second album of that put out more later on that I didn't even know about. So this has been a great experiment. And so the first band that I'm going to bring up, definitely the most known of the three bands that I'm going to talk about, but I feel that their place in history is not what it should be, and that is the band Sanctuary. So Sanctuary forms in 1985 in Seattle, and that is with Lenny Rutledge, the guitarist, as sort of the main band member throughout the history of the band. And at this time in Seattle, you have Queensryche, and you have Metal Church, and you have Fifth Angel. So this is before grunge. In the mid to late 80s, there was a very, very vibrant and interesting heavy metal scene going on. So the band really comes together, though, after Warrell Dane gets selected as the vocalist. He comes over from a band called Serpent's Night, and now we have Sanctuary as we would come to know them. In '86, they sort of bum rush Dave Mustaine after a show, force him to listen to their demo, and he actually does, and he likes it, and he says, "One day I'm going to produce you," and they go their separate ways, and they think, is this really going to happen, or did he just say this? Well, he stays in contact with them. He actually becomes a mentor to the band. Keith Rawls, who is their manager, he gets to become the manager of that band. They shop them around. They get a record label, a record deal. They sign with Epic, and lo and behold, Dave comes back to produce the album. So that is this album, which is Refuge Denied. And I show that again because, along with we talk about Megadeth and Peace Sells that had an Ed Repka cover. This is another classic Ed Repka cover who is known for doing this heavy metal and particularly thrash cover. So you've got a big label, you've got a known entity behind your band and producing it, and you have now great cover art. So this is also engineered by Terry Date, and Terry Date is known to work with everybody from Overkill to Dream Theater, White Zombie. So again, this band had it all going for them. What I like best about them in this era of thrash, and again, this debut came out in '88. So we're now past the beginning stages of it. And this band sounds a little bit different than what came before them. And that's because of Worrell and his vocals and his operatic style. He's got a, very high pitch. There's some baritone and bass in his voice as well, so he can fluctuate. Think there's some Joey Belladonna there. There's absolutely some King Diamond. It's just a powerful voice, and that's what propels their sound. And I can get why it wasn't for everybody. And some people like thrash that was rough and gruff, and this wasn't that. But I think this is a fantastic album. It starts off with Battle Angels, which is a killer track. And while you may not think you know the band or that song, it actually was used in a 2009 video game called Brutal Legend. And it was also used in an episode of a Netflix show called The OA. So maybe you were exposed to this band and didn't even know it. But the rest of this album is fantastic. Die for My Sins. The title, or same name as their band, Sanctuary. That track is fantastic. Veil of Disguise, and they do a cover of Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit, which is fantastic and actually features Dave Mustaine doing a guitar solo. So that's that album, which I love, and it sort of disappears. But they come back then in 1990 with that album, which is Into the Mirror Black. And you can now see by that album cover, it's totally different from what came before it. And this kind of sets the mood for this album. And this is now moving more in a thrash and progressive style. I think it's also very interesting. It's produced by Howard Benson. So again, they have another big name behind them. He's done everything from Pretty Boy Floyd to Motorhead. So that's a pretty wide range. The first track on here, Future Tense, was played on MTV. They got some exposure. It's a really cool song about the decade that is to come, in which Worrell says that they're verging on the edge of an edge. His lyrics tend to be deep, meaningful. Again, it's not all the kind of death and destruction. There's a lot of reflectiveness. There's a lot of looking into the future, what's going to happen, what's going to become of things. So again, that's leans more towards progressive than thrash, but the power's here, the thrash is here. But this album again does nothing, and in 92 they break up. So what happens after that? Well, Worrell, along with Jeff Loomis and Jim Shepard, form Nevermore, and Nevermore becomes a pretty big band. They put out 7 albums between 1995 and 2010. All of them are brilliant, but they are progressive metal, not thrash. That band goes on a hiatus, and so Sanctuary gets back and does some reunion dates, and miraculously out of that, in 2014, we get an album that nobody was expecting, The Year the Sun Died. I like this album, but I'm a Nevermore fan, and I hear more Nevermore than the early Sanctuary, but it's still a great album. So they then in 2017 put out this, which is Inception, which again has an edit replica cover. This is early versions of things that were to be on the debut and also tracks that didn't make it. So that's February 2017. And unfortunately, in December of that year, Worrell passes away. So that version of Sanctuary ceases to exist. They do a tribute tour with new singer Joseph Michael, who comes from the band Witherfall. And there are scheduled dates for 2026, so they are still active. But that original lineup, unfortunately, their first couple albums did not certify. They didn't chart. They're a footnote unless you're a real big fan of that era, as I am. And so I urge you that if you remember that name and kind of went away from them, go back and revisit. Or if you have never heard of Sanctuary, definitely give those first 2 albums a try.
Yeah, totally agree. I first of all, because you mentioned the cover, I love the logo of that band.
Yeah, I had that in my notes and I didn't say anything. Yes, that is a fantastic logo, and I will say they stuck with that. And just quickly back on the demo, there's great liner notes in here that talks about the history of the band, the logo, all of that. Definitely worth seeking out. And if you're an Uber fan and collector like me, there's this album Megahertz, which was an epic sampler, which has Sanctuary on it, tracks from the first album, and there's also this promo album, which is Sanctuary and Fifth Angel, again, 2 Seattle bands. It has interviews and tracks from the debut album. And I want to thank Tony Dio, our Facebook friend and YouTube friend, who actually, I don't know if he did this in a video or a post, but I had never heard of this album until about 4 or 5 months ago. And he posted it, and I had to get a copy of it being a fan. So, all right. That's my speech on Sanctuary.
Yeah, the Into the Mirror Black album was pretty important for me. It was new when I really got into metal, and I think in the magazine I used to buy, it was a record of the month or something like that. So I bought it, and at first I it took me a while to get into it because it has a yeah, it's also a bit a downer record. You know,
Oh, sure.
it isn't a party album, and the production adds to it. Um, but nowadays, when I revisit this one, I realize how great and timeless it is. Even if it's I mean it's dated obviously because he's singing from going through a new decade and stuff like
Yeah.
that and about the 90s being ahead. But yeah, such a fantastic album.
Yeah. Well, and I love World Dane, again, Sanctuary, Nevermore solo album. But back to your point, yes, there are no happy albums in that discography. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I have to listen to Refuge Denied again. I'm not. I own it on vinyl, but yeah, it was always Into the Mirror Black was always the one for me. Okay, I was just thinking with which one I will start. I think I go with this band, and we'll also go back to 1988 in a short bit. So I'm going to talk about a band from Chicago, and it's a band who was kind of haunted by bad luck, you could say. And they started out as a very unusual unusual group of people, especially for metal, because um, it was founded by two Afro Americans brothers. Let's see, Greg Fulton and Tony Heath. Don't know why they have different surnames because Wikipedia says they're brothers, but they went with stage names Ian Tafoya and Sparks Tafoya, and they founded a band called Znöwhite, um, spelled at first like the fairy tale character, and they got a singer, uh, uh, a female singer for their band. So that's like pretty unusual for the early '80s. Two black guys in a metal band with a female singer. Um, she was called Nicole, or she called herself Nicole Lee. Her real name was Sue Sharp. Don't know why she didn't go with that name. Um, yeah, and they started off putting out a flexi disc, I think, in 1983, and that got the attention of Brian Slagle, who put this band on the Metal Massacre sampler Part Three in I think it was '84. No, it was '83. With the song Hellbent. So a pretty good start for an upcoming band. Just 1 or 2 years after their inception to land on this sampler series, which was known to feature bands who would become much bigger, like Metallica, for example. Um, but then somehow in the next couple of years, they had problems. They put out an EP in 1984 called "All Hail to Thee," and they changed the spelling from the classical Snowhite to Snowhite with a Z and an umlaut above the O. Um, and yeah, that EP didn't do that much. 1 year later, they put out another EP called "Kick 'Em When They're Down." Um, Also not too great. The singer sounded. She had a kind of like a bit. Her voice was a bit squeaky. She sounded a bit like a little girl. The music was not too bad, but they didn't really go anywhere. Put out another EP, a live EP called Live Suicide in 1986. So 3 EPs in the span of 3 years, and well, all that yeah wasn't really signs of a band going for great things. So yeah, where other bands would have put out an album, they did these EPs, which obviously didn't do that much. Finally, they managed to put out a long player in 1988, so pretty late for them. But my God, is this LP a banger? And yeah, obviously they broke up right after that one. So Nicole Lee left them as soon as they finished recording it. They tried to do more, but it never worked out. So that was it. Greg Fulton later did Cyclone Temple, two albums in the 90s that didn't go anywhere as well. But yeah, why did this album not sell? Because it is one of the greatest thrash metal albums of the 80s. Well, take a look at this. I mean, today I think the cover is pretty bold. It's obviously you have to look at it when you see it. I mean, it's pretty colorful. It has a weird photo, but yeah, that wasn't going to fly with metal fans in the 80s. And this could have been, I don't know, Master of Puppets or Rain in Blood. Nobody would know about this record with these records with a cover like this. But behind this cover, album is called Act of God. Man, this album is just a total rager. It's amazing, killer riffs from front to back. Nicole Lee sounds totally unhinged on it. So much power in her voice, and the songs are there as well. So there's not a weak song on this whole thing. It starts right with the opener, To the Last Breath, Baptized by Fire, Pure Blood, War Machine. There's a cool song about the third Mad Max movie called Thunderdome, and it starts with the chanting. Two men enter, one man leaves, like in the movie. So yeah, it's if you don't know this one, it's on Spotify. Listen to this one, and please tell me in the comments that this isn't one of the greatest thrash metal albums of the 80s, because it absolutely is, and it should have propelled this band at least to another album, but it never materialized. And yeah, Cyclone Temple suffered a bit from a bad choice of a singer, in my opinion. I actually revisited. I got their last album, My Friend Lonely, and I revisited that one today. And yeah, that hasn't aged too well. But yeah, this one is a masterpiece, and it's so sad that no one really recognized it when it came out.
Well, you mentioned, how did this not become a hit? How did it get overlooked? It was overlooked by me. I remember the name back in the day. I don't ever remember seeing that record in the stores. I don't remember. Maybe I saw an ad, but it just didn't register. I mean, that cover is about as bad as a black metal album with a guy on skis, right? So that didn't help. But I totally agree. Obviously, I'm gonna listen to the bands that you're gonna talk about, and vice versa. And so I went on Spotify and played that album and was blown away. I went back and listened to the EPs, and I was not so blown away. So I agree with your assessment, but that album is absolutely fantastic. And I will say, I did discover that in 2007, they reissued that album and all three EPs on one disc. So great way to have everything the band put out. But if you just want to stand alone, get that album, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, and it came out on Roadrunner, it's Road Racer in the US, I think.
Yep.
So yeah, it should have worked, but yeah, there were so many bands back in the day, and bands that were much bigger and also already had a following. Yeah, I think I don't know why they didn't record an album before, in the years before. Maybe it would have worked if they had started a bit earlier. But yeah, this is amazing. Get that one. It's so great.
Well, and also in the States, our big magazines at that time were Circus and Hit Parader. And unless a record label ran an ad for something like that, you very rarely saw an interview or a record review. They were worried. Every month there was a story on Motley Crue, right?
Yeah.
In between albums and tours, they still wanted to see what was Motley Crue buying at a grocery store, and they would do an article on that. I mean, it was insane. So that's when I gravitated to Kerrang and Metal Hammer, and those magazines covered this stuff. But even hardcore music fans over here didn't spend that extra money on those magazines to the degree to propel some of these bands to where they should have gone. And it was just such a glut of that music that, that's why we're doing this series to
Yeah.
bring some light now on these bands. So along those lines, my next band is Dream Death. So in 84, 85, they formed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that lineup will be Ted Williams on bass and Brian Lawrence on vocals and guitar and Mike Small on drums. And they're a trio at first. And then they bring in a second guitarist, Terry Weston. And he comes over from a Doom band called Doom Watch. So in 86, they record a demo as a 3-piece, and then they record a second demo when they're a 4-piece. And that ends up getting them a record deal on New Renaissance Records, which is a fantastic label. It is founded by Anne Boleyn, who was in Hellion and who put out some great records that, again, got lost because they didn't have as big a distribution as some major labels. But this next choice is also going to be on New Renaissance that I'm doing. But for now, this is the 87 debut. And I think this cover sums up their sound. And you could say, well, is that death metal? Is that thrash? Is that doom? And I would say yes to all of it. It is a blending of those three sounds. It's a cool cover by Sue Rupert. When I checked on Discogs, it's the only album cover that I could find that she did. But what's neat is there's 2 books on here, and they have titles from their demo, which didn't make it onto the album. So if you're an Uber fan, that's kind of a neat little tidbit. And I think that their sound came together sort of organically and by accident. They weren't looking to be an early doom band or early death band, but their influence were obvious. It's Celtic Frost, and it's Slayer, and it's Black Sabbath, and it's Candlemass. So you're getting all of this. The vocals are a little gruff, right? So now instead of a World Dame, we're leaning more in terms of a Tom Araya. It works though for this music. The riffage is thrash rooted in Tommy Iommi. So now you're getting that Black Sabbath doomy, slow, dirgy sound, but in the context of a thrash band. Great solos throughout. It's slow and it's plodding, but it's the thrash is there. It just has these other elements, and that's what I think makes it interesting to me, and maybe at the time not so interesting because we weren't calling doom metal in the late 80s doom, right? And we didn't have these labels. Death metal wasn't called death metal yet. It was new, and this is one of those albums now that a lot of bands go back and say they name check as an influence, but at the time it just didn't have the sales. So it starts and ends great. The first track is Back from the Dead. Last track is Dream Death. Those are the 2 best songs to me that kind of bookend. Everything in the middle, though, is very solid. So I like it from start to finish. And I'm also, one of those guys that still to this day buys the record, studies the art, reads the liner notes. And I think it's funny that they have all these thank yous in here that include Batman, Mountain Dew, the game Warhammer, and Tawny Katane. So it's just like a music is a mix of things, sort of liner notes. So unfortunately, album does nothing. They break up. 89, they form a band called Penance, and now that is full on doom. And they put out 6 albums between 1992 and 2005. Good albums, doom albums. And then they reform. So in 2013, we get Sominum Excessum, and in 2015, we get Dissemination. Those are both very solid albums, carrying on in the tradition of this first album. As far as I can tell, they're still active. They have a Facebook page. But I would say anybody that sounds interesting, that blend of music, go back and check this out, because again, in 87, this was quite a different album to come out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned him in the last episode. I think Fenris from Dark Throne is a huge fan of this album, and what I like about this is that like you said, it doesn't really fit any drawers. You can't really label it, and it doesn't follow any classical rules of songwriting as well. So the songs are weird somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Um,
thought it was funny that when we were doing this and going back with bands, and I mentioned them, you said, "Aren't they a doom band?"
yeah.
So and yes, let's go back to my original point. They are, but there are other things. So yeah, and just real quick too. You know me with my stats and everything, just to show the difference. Sanctuary on Spotify gets 30,000 monthly listeners. That's a wide range from Megadeth, their mentor, which is almost 6 million. Uh, Dream Death, 882.
Mm.
So they need some love.
Yeah, right. And they have deserved some love, obviously. Yeah, but I will get to that point because I think in the 80s, and what I love about those small bands is that later on there were kind of established rules what's metal and how metal is supposed to work, and things that wouldn't work were kind of sorted out or relegated to other genres or something like that. But in those days in the 80s, there were bands that were completely unique and weren't playing by any rules because there weren't any. So they just made up their own sound and managed to yeah, at the same time influence a lot of bands, but never sound like anybody else. So that's I think that got lost later on because
Yeah.
nowadays you have all these labels and subgenres, and everybody's knows what it's supposed to sound, and you can refer to 150 bands who do this very specific niche sound, and that wasn't the case in the 80s. So that
Yeah. No, in the 80s, it was called metal. It was
yeah,
Bon
right,
Jovi, it was Slayer's metal. Now, thrash did come about, and that was a term. But
yeah,
the dooms and the deaths and all this other stuff, yeah, we've become a society that is so ingrained with labels and enamored with labels that I have an extreme metal show coming up, and you're going to be part of one of those as well. And I just did a Google search to see what really is extreme, and I got 40 pages of subgenres. I mean, it really is insane these days.
yeah,
I like the old days where you just said, "Hey, I listen to metal," and
yeah,
you were good.
yeah, right, right, yeah, cool. um yeah, okay, on to the next one. Yeah, my next pick, and you said in the beginning that you were rediscovering bands that you had forgotten, and yeah, I also think that's the fun aspect of this show or this series. And I did made the same experience. I mean, I knew about this band and I hadn't forgotten about them, but I haven't listened for them in ages. And going back to them, I realized how much I liked them back in the day when I didn't have so many records to choose from. Um, and also, I think it's a total forgotten band, and it's kind of yeah, it's kind of strange how they even existed and made it this far. The band I'm going to talk about is a thrash band from LA called Viking. Um, and they started off as Tracer. Released a demo in 1986, then immediately renamed themselves as Viking. Um, Recorded their demo. The demo was called "Do or Die," and got picked up by Roadrunner, who released their debut album in 1988, so the same year as Znöwhite and Sanctuary, and it looked like this. Um, Pretty cool cover artwork, with a red bearded Viking. It's not me. It's one of my forefathers. Um, Slaughtering opponents on the battlefield, and that's exactly how this album sounds. Um, it's it's not that well produced. The drums sound a bit cardboardy, I'd say, kind of weird sound. But the album is fast and pummeling from start to finish. Um, I love the vocalist. Um, that and that's a funny bit. I didn't realize it. I just found it out when reading about the band because the vocalist was called or his name was Ron Daniel, and but he on the record he is called Ron Erickson. So maybe um, this is full cosplay. You know, having a band called Viking and naming yourself Ron Erickson. And the funny thing is the guitar player who's called Brett Saracek. He also called himself Brett Erickson for this album, and he stuck to this name. He later became the guitarist on the last Dark Angel album in 1991. Time Does Not Heal. So great guitar player. I mean, we one day we'll have to talk about Dark Angel, but they're not that unknown. But man, Time Does Not Heal. What an album. Um, yeah, and I think this doesn't sound like 88. This somehow sounds earlier. It's kind of dusty and muddy and not well produced. And yeah, these Californians singing about Vikings, which is yeah kind of endearing. But yeah, very cool lyrics. I just realized it also has not just this simple paper inner sleeve, but it has full lyrics and these photo collages they had back in the day with live shots and graphics and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a really cool album. Nothing too yeah. I mean, there weren't brilliant songwriters or anything, but it's just a fun album because it's so dedicated to this Viking thing and make this kind of fast and raging album from front to back. But the funny story doesn't end there because Brett Erickson, the warlord with the red beard, kind of, he becomes a born again Christian after this album. Um, so when they release their second one called Man of Straw, he completely dials back from this war metal or Nordic metal stuff, and now they kind of have kind of social conscious lyrics on that one. Um, it's much cleaner produced. They have a thing with the drum sound because on this one the drums also sound a bit bass drum sounds a bit weird. Um, they look totally cool. I love the bass player who I wonder if he can see anything with this with his hair in his face. And yeah, and I got this one back in the day. I think I bought it in the US you'd say dollar bin. At our place it was probably the Deutschmark bin. I don't know. Didn't pay too much. I wonder how they even made it to the second album on Roadrunner that got distributed all around the world and landed in my little town. But I really liked this one back in the day. It has a cover of Pat Benatar's "Hell Is for Children," and I back then I loved these. I loved it when metal bands were covering pop songs. Um, I don't know. Today, I would prefer another one of their thrashers, but it's still a good version. But there's one song on here called "Creative Divorce," which is about killing your wife. It's kind of a yeah. It's a bit like a murder mystery. It's written from the perspective of the husband. It's actually a pretty cool lyric. And I back in the day, I always put this on my thrash compilations on tape because yeah, I loved it. It's fast and furious, and I think the singer sounds super cool. Can't really describe his voice. I was thinking who does he sound like, but I couldn't place him. Um, Not too special, gruff voice, a little bit high, and he has a bit maybe he has a bit of a hardcore vibe in his voice. I don't know, but he doesn't sound like these tough guys in the 90s. Um, so yeah, they broke up because they didn't go anywhere with any of those records. Um, and they finally they reformed and put out another album, I think in 2014, which looks more like this one. So they are Vikings back on the front cover. Yeah, but it's not bad. But uh, I'm not really sure what I should think of these late reunions after like 20 or 40 years, where they obviously hoping to profit from the resurgence of thrash metal. I think it's kind of cool that they're back, but do I really want to hear those albums? Not really. So if you want to check out Viking, I would say try Do or Die, and if you can pick up this one for small change, it's a nice addition to your collection, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting band. Again, not essential. And a lot of these bands we're talking about, we're not saying these are the pinnacle. This is just if you want to explore thrash or revisit thrash, I think that's an interesting band to do. I do like that. I probably like the second one more than the first. I don't think Odin liked the second one more than the first because of the shift in beliefs, but that's another story. But yeah, I think it definitely another band to check out, and so that will segue into my final one. And I will stress, as I talked about Dream Death and this next band with death elements, I'm not a death metal fan. I cannot get over the harsh vocals, the Cookie Monster vocals, right? I can do Slayer, I can do early death, I can do some bands at the infancy, but when it's Cannibal Corpse and it's Cattle Decapitation, and I musically love it, the vocals are a problem for me. But this band was right there at the infancy, and that is Postmortem. So this is another band that you could say, who are they? Because while Dream Death had 882 Spotify listeners a month, uh, Postmortem has 872. So they're not a band that gets a lot of play, but they are a band, as I'll get into this, that are name checked as an influence on that death metal scene and other genres as well. And there are multiple bands named Postmortem. So this is the one you want. This is the 82 formed in Boston when they were in high school. That's the Postmortem. And as I said, they are a pioneer in the death movement, but they also flirt with punk and with jazz. So this is a really weird album for 1986. And it will influence not only death metal bands, but bands that will come later, like Dillinger Escape Plan, that did some really different experimentation. This is also a New Renaissance Records, again, a label I implore you to check out. And I will say this is 12 songs, anywhere from 13 seconds to 12 plus minutes. So again, this is a different band. It's John McCarthy was on vocals on this, John Alexander on guitar, Mark Kelly, who is a founding member, and I think still current member. I can't really tell if they're still around or not. They may be active. Even I think it's Metal Archives site where they have the dates of when the band exists just has question marks. And then also Rick McIver on drum. I don't want to leave him out. And so this is a mix of thrash for sure, and early death, yes, and hardcore punk as well, and maybe even crust punk. I mean, this is really a different mix. And again, keep in mind, this is 86. This isn't 89. This is 86. This is unusual. And I remember I did a lot of blind buys on records as a kid, even though, as we alluded to, we didn't have a lot of money and we bought only so many records to listen to them time and again. But I had a small little independent record store that specialized in metal and in punk. So I could go in there and just stare at the wall and see all these interesting covers or get some feedback from them. And that's how I discovered this band. So the first three songs on this album, they're fast and furious. They're heavy, screeching guitar, guttural vocals. And you think that's how it's going to continue. Not so. So fourth track is No Time. Now we go to a 5-minute song. That's a fast pace, and then it's slow and plotting. So it's going back and forth. And again, you hear some early death vocals, but not the Cookie Monster, just gruff. We go to side 2, if you have the vinyl. We start off with a 38-second instrumental, and that goes into a 13-second goofy little thing that's a tribute to Soupy Sales, who was a kids' TV show star in the 60s. Think a precursor to Pee Wee Herman, if you will. Then we have the title track, which is a minute 20, fast and furious. There's spoken vocals, there's screams. Of course, it's corner, corner, disembowel, corner, corner, die. And, that's delivered fast. And then we have track 11, which is I Want to Die. And that is the 12-minute epic that's slow and grinding. And think side 2 of Black Flag's My War. So I'm just giving you all of these different things that have come on this album that in 86 other bands were doing separately, not together. This is really a very interesting record. So in 87, they followed up with the EP, The Missing Link. And now instead of that, which is not exactly party time cover, you have this weird tribute to prehistoric times. So this is 4 songs. There's 2 2-minute songs. There's 2 6-minute songs. It's the 86 lineup that was on the debut album. And then it's a different lineup, including Michelle Meldrum on guitar. And she actually comes from a all-girl hair metal band a la Vixen called Phantom Blue. So again, weird mix. Now, she doesn't play like Phantom Blue. The guitar fits on this. Then in 89, they put out Festival of Fun. That's now 18 songs, 35 minutes. There's a lot of short things. There's goofy stuff. There's things that kind of remind me of some Dead Kennedy things. It's far removed from that debut album. It reminds me of, and we did a previous show and we talked about Coven, who have some very serious, straightforward thrash. And then they have some almost parody kind of humorous, goofy stuff. And that's what that is a mix of. They do another album, 93, Destined for Failure. Then flash forward to 2009. They put out Message from the Dead, but that is without original vocalist John McCarthy because he passed away. They have a number of different singers come in, including Travis Ryan from Cattle Decapitation and Seth Putnam. And I won't say the band's name so we don't get bumped off of YouTube, but the initials are AC. And if you know, you know. So having said all that, after the debut, do you really need to go any further? That's up to you. But I think that debut is essential, especially if you want to hear some of that early origins of the genres that I talked about. I remember listening to this, as a teenager back in the day and having heard Slayer and things of that nature. So I wasn't unprepared for what I heard, but the different elements that came into this certainly was interesting and a revelation to me. And in my wide range of interests and taste in music, it was a perfect fit.
Cool. So you are you come from Pennsylvania, right? So
correct.
Were they in your vicinity or?
Boston's sort of it's on the East Coast, just upper East Coast versus where we are. We had a small club here that got all kinds of acts and lots of thrash. It was sort of our version of Brooklyn Lemoore, but this band never came through. So it was it's unfortunate. I just think they were wrong place, wrong time, as I always bring up. It's just a weird mix. But like I said, now there are lots of bands that are doing what they did then now or similar, and they were a big influence. So it's another one of those underground bands that if you know, you know, and if you don't, you should explore them.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, my last band is you started with your most well-known. I will finish with my probably most well-known, but yeah, they were really influential, but and most I think that their name is pretty well known, but I doubt that too many people nowadays know what this band sounds like. And I'm talking about Florida's Nasty Savage. And I remember how I know of their existence for the first time, and what I loved about those early days where I was discovering metal and starting to read the magazine is that when you open a magazine and you read about all those bands, each one of those bands seems equally important to you. Because you don't know any of them, you just know their names. They are in that magazine, and so wow, all these bands must be great, and so on. And later you form this kind of hierarchy where you know, okay, they just put out this one album, and there was it was around '89 when Nasty Savage released their third album, Penetration Point. And there was a story about them in that magazine I read, and it was very intriguing because Nasty Savage have this amazing singer called Nasty Ronnie, and he was a huge. I don't think he was more than a wrestling fan. I think he was a wrestler himself. He was pretty muscular, and he would go on stage, right? He would go on stage and smash TV sets over his head, and it would happen pretty often that he would be bleeding. Yeah, and I've seen a video, a live video from back in the day where he's doing like power slams on stage. So he goes out and does this flips and he lands on his back like a wrestler would do this with another guy on the floor. So he was just crazy, and the story in that magazine totally fascinated me, and it was there was a huge photograph in the background, but it was like a live shot of the guy where he's diving from the stage and he is wearing this metal gear, and but it was just a blown up photograph, so you couldn't really make out his face because it was all blurry, and that added to the mystique and fascination because I thought, man, I want to know how this guy looks. Yeah, and well, they broke up after that album. Never read about them again. But then I found their records in a second-hand store, and I bought them. So that is the debut that came out in 1985. Another band that was featured on Metal Massacre sampler. Um, then they released this one in '87, Indulgence, and the EP called Abstract Reality in 1988, and then came Penetration Point in 1989. And yeah, like I said, the guy was so intriguing, and the music is as well. On Wikipedia, funnily, it says that Nasty Savage were a huge influence on death metal. And I mean, there are some creepy riffs on their albums, but they don't sound death metal. And I think the guy who wrote that entry got something wrong, because Nasty Savage are from Florida, and there wasn't a big scene in Florida. Sabotage and Nasty Savage were probably the only bands that were known in any capacity. But Nasty Savage were a bit heavier and darker than Sabotage. So all of these young bands that would later go on to form the Florida death metal scene saw them and were inspired by them. So Chuck Schuldiner from Death, back then it was still Mantas, and Executioner, which later went on to become Obituary. They all saw this band and yeah, were kind of inspired by them. But the sound they do, and that's what I said when you were talking about Dream Death. There's no other band that sounds like Nasty Savage. It's a weird mix. Nasty Ronnie can go very high, so he's got these high shrieks in there, like King Diamond shrieks, but he can go very low. And the music, the riffs are are strange. I would say it's kind of a progressive thrash sound. Maybe you could call it technical thrash, but then it's not that look how many notes we can play or something, but it's just weird riffs and time signatures and rhythms and strange breaks. And then they have these lyrics which go into S&M and pornography and the seedy underbelly of those big cities, and they're not that exploitative, but kind of creepy. So it's about psychology and stuff, So and I dove into that band in the last couple of weeks, and I'm totally fascinated by them because they are so unique and they have such a great sound. They did two reunion albums, one in 2004 called Psycho Psycho, and another one 2 years ago. Forgot the title of it. Check. Jeopardy Room in 2024, and they're they're not that bad. I mean, they pretty much kept that sound. I mean, it's a bit more polished. Back in the 80s, the production didn't always know how to handle that wall of sound that those bands were producing. So it was always a bit tinny and yeah, and nowadays it's all very polished, and every drummer can do those double bass runs and stuff. Um, but yeah, actually, I thought that was pretty surprised by how good that newest album still is. But yeah, of course, if you want to check Nasty Savage out, go back to their debut, or I mean, these are all great. I don't think there's any letdown on any of these ones. So fascinating, and it's a band you can spend hours with because they are so interesting, and yeah, there's really no band that yeah, can be compared with them. So yeah, totally unique and great history. I wish there was more out there to. I would love to see a live video. I know they released a videotape or something like that, or a DVD, but yeah, on the web you can find it. So there's a funny commercial out there where they're in their town in Florida, in Brandon, I think, and they are visiting a hair salon and get their hair done, and it's a commercial for that hair salon. So it's very funny, these big guys with their long hairs going in there. Yeah, so Nasty Savage, great band.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the only thing I own is which is fantastic. And I don't know, I just wasn't that into them back in the day because I didn't explore anything further. I liked it. I guess I just lost touch with the band. I revisited things. When you brought them up, I think the last album that came out 2024, it's great. You talk about, do you want to hear these old bands playing new music? In this case, I think it holds up. It's certainly not new and revolutionary, but true to their sound. No, but so we're talking about 85, the debut, and thrash ends up becoming something of a stylistic shift, and that is an appearance too, right? You had your hair metal bands that looked a certain way, and Slayer started out the way they did with their spikes and everything. But as we move into the late 80s, then it really becomes jeans and high top Nikes. And so when you have a band that looks like that, Man of War never made a big splash over here because many thought they were weird and goofy. And this band is certainly weird and goofy, but in a good way. So glad you brought this pickup. I think this is definitely one. And, it's not a band that you mentioned has this giant catalog that you have to absorb. It's a smaller catalog that I would start at the beginning and go to the end. And I think if you like the beginning, you're going to like the progression.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm still, I don't know. It's weird that a band like this exists. This is a great pick of Nasty Ronnie as well here. with these Macho Man Randy Savage
Yeah.
sunglasses. So yeah,
Well, and I will say, I always give my Spotify. And when I give Spotify numbers, this is just a point of reference. Please buy physical media, everybody. Support the bands, or even you're buying used records and CDs that the band doesn't profit from. You're still, putting out an atmosphere that we still want physical product. But it's a good test of who's listening to what. Nasty Savage has 6,200 monthly listens. So way better than 800 at some of Postmortem and Dream Death, but not nearly what it should be for, us metal historians. Let's go back and revisit this stuff.
yeah, right. Cool. So I hope we could hook you up with some bands you didn't already know about, or maybe we inspired you to dive back in your collections and pull out some older stuff. Whatever it is, maybe you think, well, that's boring. I already knew all these bands. Okay, maybe you revisit our first video. Maybe there's something for you. And yeah, there's still a long list of bands we have in our back pocket. So we will come up with a new edition of this one in the future. Um, till then, um, keep thrashing. Alex, thank you very much for being here.
Yep.
And of course, give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and give us your comments. We want to know what bands you think we should get into, and maybe we will feature one of them in the future. Until then, thank you for your time. Bye bye.